It was the kind of night that made you believe in ghosts. The stars barely shimmered in the sky, and the moon was just a thin crescent, offering almost no light on the winding road ahead. I sat in the passenger seat of an old sheriff's SUV, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. Beside me was Officer Ray, a tall, weathered man whose lined face spoke of decades of hard-earned wisdom. He was nearing retirement and carried with him countless stories that could freeze your blood. Officer Ray was part Apache and had spent much of his career patrolling the reservation. He knew every twist and turn of the desert roads and had a quiet, unshakable confidence that made everything feel more intense. That night, he decided to take me to a place off the regular patrol route, an abandoned gas station far from the nearest town. Places like this, he said in his deep, gravelly voice, hold secrets the desert doesn't let go of easily. As we drove through the narrow canyon roads, the tires crunched on loose gravel, and the wind howled softly through the darkness. The road coiled like a serpent, and my imagination began painting shadows into monsters. We're here to make sure no one's using the old station as a hideout, Officer Ray explained, his face partially illuminated by the dashboard lights. Out here, people think they can disappear, but the desert sees everything. When we crested a hill overlooking the gas station, Officer Ray pulled the SUV to a stop. He pointed at the crumbling structure below. It looked like something from a horror movie, lost in time and wrapped in shadows. That's when I saw it. A figure standing behind the building, cloaked in black. "Look, over there," I whispered, nudging Officer Ray. He saw it too. "Let's check it out," he said calmly, but with a sharp edge in his voice. He radioed dispatch before guiding the vehicle down the steep road toward the station. As we approached, the figure began to move smoothly, almost gliding over the cracked pavement. Officer Ray parked, stepped out, and motioned for me to stay behind him. "Police, stop right there," he called out. The figure ignored him, continuing to drift farther into the shadows. Officer Ray followed, and I stayed close behind, my chest tight with fear. Suddenly, the figure stopped. Slowly, its head turned, twisting around like an owl's, while its body remained motionless. Its face was obscured in the dark, but I could see its grin wide, unnatural, and its eyes glowing pale white. Officer Ray stumbled back, a sharp breath escaping him. I was frozen, my feet glued to the cold ground. And then it vanished. Just like that, the figure dissolved into the night, leaving nothing but silence. Stood there for what felt like an eternity before Officer Ray spoke. "Let's go," he said, his voice unsteady. As we climbed back into the SUV, I realized this was just the start of a long, strange night. As we drove away from the station, the radio crackled with a new call. "Disturbance reported near a small settlement, about 3 hours east," said the dispatcher. Officer Ray looked at me, his face serious. "Ready for another one?" I nodded, though my hands were still trembling. The road stretched on beneath the pale light of a fuller moon, the desert stretching endlessly around us. On the way, Officer Ray told me stories, legends of the land, warnings passed down from elders, and strange occurrences he had seen over the years. When we reached the settlement, he slowed the SUV and pointed toward a sandstone ridge. "That's where they last saw him," he said. "A man on horseback, dressed in traditional clothing, firing shots into the air. But when we arrived, the ridge was empty. The horse and rider had vanished." "We'll track him," Officer Ray said, grabbing a flashlight and his rifle. I followed, trying to match his careful steps as he traced faint hoofprints under the moonlight. The trail led us to a lone Joshua tree standing like a sentinel in the desert. "Something's off," Officer Ray whispered, and a chill ran down my spine. We approached carefully, and under the tree stood a man, perfectly still. Officer Ray signaled for me to stay back as he moved closer. "You're surrounded. Drop your weapon," Officer Ray called out. But the man didn't move. He didn't speak. As Officer Ray reached him, the truth became clear. The man was dead. He had been dead for days, propped against the tree as though still watching over the land. We searched the area, but the horse was nowhere to be found. "None of this makes sense," Officer Ray muttered. The walk back to the settlement was quiet. Officer Ray seemed lost in thought, his eyes fixed on the stars above. The night wasn't done with us yet. Another radio call came through, a robbery at a reservation gas station nearby. The scene was chaos when we arrived. Emergency lights flashed, and a small crowd had gathered. A man lay on the ground, motionless, with a gas station attendant standing nearby, hands shaking. But then I saw it. Something dark and smoke-like rose from the man's body. It took the shape of a person before darting away into the shadows. "Did you see that?" Officer Ray asked, his voice low. I nodded. As paramedics arrived, Officer Ray pulled me aside. "Some spirits are twisted when they die doing bad things. They don't leave peacefully." The rest of the night passed in a blur. By the time Officer Ray dropped me off at home, the horizon was painted with the soft colors of dawn. As I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the shadows, the grinning figure, and the lifeless man under the Joshua tree. Some mysteries, I realized, aren't meant to be solved. They're simply whispered into the wind, carried forever across the desert night. When I was about 13, my parents planned a 5-night stay at a secluded cabin somewhere in Oregon. My grandmother joined us for the trip. The events that unfolded during those nights left a mark on me that I'll never forget. I remember stepping out of the car and feeling the sharp chill of the mountain air on my face. The woods stretched out endlessly around us as I made my way to the cabin door. "Eli, honey, why don't you head upstairs and unpack your things?" my mom called out. When I pushed open the cabin door, it let out a long, eerie creak. Inside was a cozy open space with a couch facing an old TV and a kitchen that had a counter lined with high stools. I climbed the stairs, past a small bathroom, walked down a narrow hallway, and entered the room I'd be sleeping in. I froze. Right in the middle of the floor was a dead squirrel. Its body was mangled, and something had clearly been chewing on it. The blood had smeared across the wooden planks. I screamed and bolted downstairs just as my dad was helping my grandma out of her wheelchair. "Dad, there's a dead squirrel in my room," I stammered. He sighed, clearly annoyed. "You're old enough to handle it, Eli. Just clean it up." So I did. I used nearly an entire roll of paper towels and half a can of disinfectant spray to deal with the mess. That evening, around 6:30 p.m., my mom made spaghetti with sausage, one of my favorite meals at the time. I carried my plate over to the couch where Grandma was sitting. As I sat down, something caught my eye. A square-shaped trapdoor in the middle of the living room floor. "Hey, Mom, what's this door for?" "Probably just access to the crawl space," she said casually. "It keeps the foundation dry when it rains." Her answer seemed reasonable enough, and I turned my attention to the old TV. Dinner tasted amazing that night. Soon after, it was time for bed. My dad had promised kayaking and hiking the next morning, and I was excited. I slipped under the covers and fell asleep almost immediately. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint rustling noise. I opened my bedroom door slightly and peeked into the dim hallway. The shadows cast by the moon danced across the floor, but nothing seemed out of place. The sound continued, faint but persistent, coming from below. I crept downstairs, my bare feet silent on the wooden steps. Kneeling on the floor, I pressed my ear against the trap door. The noise was definitely coming from beneath me, Against all common sense, I decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, I slowly opened the trapdoor. A rush of cold, musty air hit me as I climbed down into the crawl space. The space was larger than I expected, like a maze of wooden beams and dirt floors. I crawled forward, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then I saw it. About 10 feet ahead, something moved. I froze and aimed my flashlight at it. Huddled in the corner was a figure, pale, thin, with unnaturally long limbs. Its eyes reflected the flashlight's beam, glowing like two tiny mirrors. It let out a high-pitched screech, and I realized I had startled it. Panicking, I turned and began crawling back as fast as I could. I could hear it following me, its long fingers wrapping around the wooden beams to pull itself forward. My chest tightened as I thought about the dead squirrel in my room earlier. Had this thing been feeding on it? Every second felt like an eternity as I scrambled back toward the trapdoor. Just as I felt its presence almost upon me, I lunged upward and pulled myself out. I slammed the door shut and threw my weight on top of it. The creature scratched and pushed from below, but after a few minutes, the noise stopped. Shaking and breathless, I stumbled upstairs and banged on my parents' door. My dad opened it, looking groggy and irritated. "Dad, there's something under the cabin. We need to leave now." He dismissed me, saying I must have had a nightmare, and sent me back to my room. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, we went out on the lake. My dad set up our fishing rods, and while I didn't catch anything, the peaceful water helped distract me from the horrors of the night before. That evening, we roasted marshmallows over the fire pit. Grandma and Mom shared stories about their old camping trips. The s'mores were perfect, warm and gooey. For a while, everything felt normal again. But when night came, my fear returned. Somehow, I drifted off to sleep, only to wake again hours later to the faint creak of the trapdoor opening. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard cupboard doors slamming and faint scratching noises coming from the hallway. The doorknob to my room rattled slightly, and I froze. Then, I heard my dad's voice boom from down the hall. "Get out of here!" A screech filled the cabin, followed by the sound of shattering glass. I burst out of my room and saw my dad standing near a broken window, clutching his fishing knife. A smear of blood trailed out the window and into the night. We packed our bags immediately and left the cabin without a word. None of us spoke during the car ride home, and we've never returned to the woods since. If you ever hear strange noises in a new place, don't wait to investigate. Sometimes it's better to leave immediately. The day had a rare crispness to it, the kind you only find in the mountains of Montana, where the sky stretches endlessly and the air carries a sharp bite scented with pine. I was buzzing with excitement in the passenger seat of my mom's boyfriend's rusty old Ford pickup, its suspension groaning under the weight of our camping supplies. My best friend Alex sat beside me, both of us rambling on about the latest Fortnite matches we dominated and the epic weekend we were sure awaited us. Dan, Mom's boyfriend, was behind the wheel, his face partially obscured by his aviator sunglasses, while Mom hummed softly to some classic rock tune playing on the radio. The cabin we were headed to was an old family treasure, passed down through Dan's side for generations, tucked away in the remote Bitterroot Mountains. As the truck wound its way up steep gravel roads, the thick forests of fir and pine occasionally broke open to reveal sprawling valleys and rugged peaks, scenes so stunning they looked painted. When we finally bumped up the narrow driveway to the cabin, it stood there like an old guardian watching over the wilderness. Its log walls had turned a soft silver with age, and a thin wisp of smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. The early fall chill had started to settle in, and the thought of a crackling fire and gooey s'mores was just about the most comforting thing I could imagine. After unloading our gear, Alex and I wasted no time hauling out the two battered ATVs from the truck bed. Dan gave them a quick once-over, nodded in approval, and we roared off into the surrounding forest trails. The engines growled beneath us as we tore through mud and scattered leaves in our wake. The air was thick with the smell of earth and pine, a mix so fresh it felt electric. As dusk crept over the mountains, the four of us gathered around the stone fire pit outside the cabin. Dan expertly coaxed a fire into life, and soon we were roasting hot dogs on sticks, the flames casting warm flickers across our faces. The Esmores were messy, sticky affairs, and laughter flowed as freely as the nearby creek. Later, Alex and I lay sprawled on the cool grass, staring up at the sky. The stars began to scatter across the deepening blue, and the Milky Way stretched out like a faint, silvery road overhead. I pointed out constellations, half of which I made up on the spot, and Alex snorted, calling me out but playing along. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, our parents called us inside. The cabin's interior was warm and inviting, the fire in the stone hearth casting flickering light on the wooden floors. Upstairs in the open loft, rows of cozy beds sat beneath a low ceiling of rough wooden beams. Alex and I grabbed the two beds by the window, where we could still hear the whisper of the wind through the trees. Wrapped in heavy quilts, I remember thinking how perfect everything felt, far removed from school worries and everyday drama. But that peaceful first day was only the calm before a storm. The next afternoon, after lunch, Mom shooed Alex and me out the door with a smile and a firm wave. "Go burn off some energy, boys," she said. Dan was busy with repairs around the cabin, the rhythmic clink of his tools drifting through the crisp air. We wandered aimlessly through the woods, sticks in hand, pretending they were rifles as we reenacted scenes from our favorite video games. We dodged imaginary enemies, dived behind trees, and crawled through leaves, lost in our world of make-believe. As the light began to wane, I remembered the old treehouse. It wasn't much, just a weathered wooden platform lashed between three sturdy trees about 10 feet off the ground. Dan had told us it was built decades ago by his father, a secret hideout for daydreaming and stargazing. "Hey, let's check out the treehouse," I said, grinning. Alex's face lit up, and we pushed through the underbrush until we reached it. The creaky wooden ladder protested under our weight, but it held firm. We settled on the platform, legs dangling over the edge, backs resting against the rough tree trunks. We talked about everything and nothing. Movies we wanted to see, girls we thought were cute, and future adventures we dreamed of. Then the forest went silent. It was sudden, like someone had flipped a switch. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, heavy stillness. Alex froze, his eyes darting toward the trees. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I strained to listen and caught it. A faint sound, like something heavy stepping carefully through the underbrush. My stomach twisted with instinctive fear. Then we saw it, a hulking figure, partially hidden behind a tree not far from us. Its eyes reflected the fading light, glowing faintly. Dark fur hung in tangled mats from its massive frame, and it stood utterly still. "We need to go," I said, my voice cracking. Alex nodded, and we scrambled down the ladder, our feet slipping on the wooden rungs. Behind us, the creature began to move. I could hear its slow, deliberate footsteps crushing leaves. We ran. The clearing came into view, the cabin just ahead. I dared a glance back and saw it. Closer now, its face twisted and disturbingly human-like, but with something wild and wrong in its expression. We burst into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind us. Our breaths came in ragged gasps as Mom and Dan rushed over, concern etched into their faces. We stammered our story, tripping over words, trying to make them understand. That night, long after the adults had dismissed our tale and gone back to their card game, the scratching began. Soft at first, then steady, insistent. I peeked out from under my blanket and, in the faint light from the porch lamp, I saw it. A hand, human yet not, dragging slowly along the wooden railing outside. Sleep was impossible. The night felt endless. Every sound a reminder that something terrible waited just beyond the thin walls of our sanctuary. This is my only strange experience, and it happened during my first year of high school in 1985. The story involves two friends of mine, Mike and Dan. I'm using different names for them to keep their identities private. It was Halloween night, and the three of us had just wrapped up an evening football practice. We were around 14 years old, just typical suburban teens from northern Pennsylvania. That year, we were slightly too old for trick-or-treating, but we still wanted free candy. So we threw on our football jerseys and went door to door, collecting whatever we could. Mike was the kind of kid who had little parental supervision. He had shaggy hair, a devil-may-care attitude, and girls were always drawn to him. He seemed effortlessly cool, especially with his worn-out leather jacket and the fact that he could smoke freely in his basement. Dan and I came from more traditional households with curfews, homework rules, and expectations, though I wasn't exactly a stellar student. At that time, we were all getting into heavy metal bands like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Dio. We thought the dark imagery made us look tough, even though we were just kids. Sometimes we'd even play vinyl records backward, convinced we'd hear secret satanic messages. Mike had crafted a metal cross in shop class, which he occasionally wore upside down, calling himself Johnny Steele after a character in one of the songs. That Halloween night, after filling our bags with candy, we ended up back at Dan's house. For some reason, we found ourselves hanging out in his parents' bedroom. It was on the main floor of their modest split-level home, just off the living room. We dumped out our candy bags and started sorting through them when the small clock radio on the nightstand suddenly turned on by itself. We chuckled nervously and brushed it off as a weird fluke. But then the lights began flickering. Mike saw this as some kind of sign. With Halloween vibes in the air, he grabbed his makeshift metal cross and started mumbling some mock ritualistic blessing. Dan and I were sitting on the bed while Mike stood by the nightstand, holding his cross upside down. He murmured something like, "I bless you in the name of..." Well, you know who. Even now, decades later, I don't want to say the name he used. Mike moved to the bedroom light, repeated the same words, and then noticed a wooden crucifix hanging over the doorway. He approached it, raised his cross, and started to speak again. At that moment, I swear I saw him lift off the ground and get thrown backward, at least 5 feet, landing hard on the bed between Dan and me. I was frozen with fear, but then I saw Mike start choking, his mouth contorting as if he was swallowing his own tongue. Dan jumped on top of him, trying to force his fingers into Mike's mouth to stop him from choking. Meanwhile, the lights kept flashing, and the radio blared static and distorted music. I was paralyzed, watching from the doorway. Dan's eyes were wide, and his face was pale with terror. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights, the radio, and the chaos, all silent. Dan was trying to get Mike to say something, anything, but Mike just sat there, pale and trembling. I kept stepping in and out of the room, unable to stay still. Eventually, we all bolted out of the house and onto the front lawn. None of us spoke. From outside, we could still see the lights flickering in the bedroom window and hear faint noises from the radio. Dan was panicking. After all, it was his parents' room, and he was probably afraid of getting in trouble. We stood there for about 10 minutes, staring up at the window until everything finally went still. Mike was visibly shaken and remained completely silent. Dan ended up calling Mike's mom to come pick him up. I'll never forget the look on Mike's face when he got into his mom's car. He wouldn't even make eye contact with us. That night, I lay in bed crying, too scared to close my eyes. Every tiny creak and whisper in the house sent chills down my spine. The next morning, I met Mike outside the school. He looked exhausted, and it was obvious he didn't want to talk about what had happened. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked, asking if he could set our coach's car on fire or do something equally outrageous. Mike cracked a weak smile, and for a moment, things felt normal again. A couple of weeks later, Mike got kicked off the football team for reasons I can't remember, and the three of us slowly drifted apart. Dan and I stayed on friendly terms, but we ended up in different social circles as high school went on. We never sat down and fully unpacked what happened that night. Over the years, I've told this story to my wife and a handful of close friends, but most people don't believe it. And honestly, I don't blame them. Mike's whole Johnny Steele persona made the story sound exaggerated, almost like a performance. But it wasn't. Since that night, I've never experienced anything remotely paranormal or spiritual, for that matter. Whatever happened in that room, I still can't explain it, and I'm not sure I ever want to. I never expected inheriting Nana's old house would feel so eerie and unsettling. It had been nearly a month since Nana passed, yet the grief was still sharp and fresh. I missed her terribly. She had a knack for storytelling, weaving tales about her childhood in the hills and the secrets hidden in the dense woods surrounding her home. My parents already had their own house, so they decided I would be the one to inherit the family home tucked deep in the Ozark Mountains. The house was ancient, with creaky floorboards that groaned underfoot and walls that seemed to sigh with every gust of wind. It was nestled far from the nearest town, separated by a dense forest that always seemed to murmur with unseen voices. My brother Alex and I drove up last Saturday to start sorting through Nana's belongings. It was an emotional task, but we hoped it would bring us some comfort, as if she were still with us in spirit. We laughed and cried while sifting through her photographs, faded dresses, and old trinkets. On Sunday afternoon, just as we were about to call it a day, I spotted a narrow door hidden behind an old wardrobe. It led to the attic. I couldn't recall ever having been up there before. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung from every corner. The single light bulb overhead was dead, so Alex and I had to rely on our phone flashlights to see anything. The dust stirred with every step, making us cough and sneeze. In one shadowy corner, draped in a stained canvas, I noticed a weathered wooden trunk. It was covered in faded carvings, and the rusty lock had long since broken. With effort, we dragged it into the middle of the attic and pried it open. Inside, we discovered stacks of leather-bound journals, carefully labeled with dates spanning from 1955 to the late 1990s. The handwriting was unmistakably Nana's, neat, flowing, and deliberate. "Check this out," I said, my voice trembling slightly with excitement and unease. Alex peered over my shoulder. "Whoa, she wrote a lot. What do you think's in them?" "Stories, probably," I replied, though something about the journals felt heavier than mere anecdotes. As I flipped through the pages, I realized these weren't just stories. They were diary entries. Nana had written about her life in this house, and not all of it was cheerful. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the wind outside began to howl through the trees. The creaks and groans of the house grew louder in the quiet attic. The journals spoke of locals who'd warned her about the woods. "Never whistle after dark," one passage read, "or you'll invite something you can't send away." A chill crept down my spine as a gust of wind rattled the window. Alex and I exchanged a nervous glance. "Maybe we should finish this downstairs," I suggested. "Good idea," Alex said, already heading for the attic door. That night, after Alex left to head back home, I found myself alone in Nana's house. I had planned to stay a few days to keep sorting through her things. But now, the house felt different. The shadows seemed darker, the wind louder, and every creak felt deliberate. Wrapping myself in a blanket, I curled up in an armchair with one of the journals and a flashlight. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. Nana wrote about shadows in the woods, glowing eyes staring from the treeline, and whispers on the wind that sounded almost human. One entry, dated October 1962, stood out. I heard a whistle at dusk today. Came from the edge of the forest. When I looked out, I saw someone or something standing there. The silhouette was human-like, but wrong. Its arms were too long, and its eyes glowed faintly. It just watched. My eyes darted toward the window, half expecting to see those same glowing eyes staring back. I shuddered and continued reading. Nana described nights filled with heavy silence, where even the nocturnal animals seemed to vanish. She wrote about a feeling of being watched, and how she would sometimes hear faint footsteps circling the house. A sudden noise made me jump. My heart hammered in my chest, but it was just the old house settling. Or so I told myself. The entries grew more intense as the years passed. Nana wrote about her brother, Uncle Sam, who vanished one night after hearing their mother's voice calling from the woods, even though she'd been gone for years. Search parties found nothing but Sam's scarf caught on a thorn bush, stained with something dark. Nana believed something in the woods could mimic voices, lure people out. I felt a pang of sorrow for her fear, her loss. Yet here I was in the same house, surrounded by the same woods. The next morning, after a restless night, I decided I couldn't stay cooped up inside. I needed to see the edge of the woods for myself. Bundling up, I stepped outside. The air was biting cold, and the forest loomed ahead like a wall of shadows. I approached the treeline cautiously, the snow crunching under my boots. The trees stood still, silent. I strained my ears, listening, and then I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft it could have been the wind, but it sounded like Nana's voice. My chest tightened. Logic told me it was just my imagination, but instinct screamed at me to run. I turned back toward the house, but not before catching a glimpse of something shifting between the trees. Back inside, I bolted the door and pressed my back against it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Whatever this was, it felt real. The warnings in Nana's journals weren't just stories. They were cautionary tales. As I packed my bags, a realization hit me. Running away wouldn't change anything. This house, these woods, this history, they were part of my family. If I wanted answers, if I wanted to break whatever hold this place had over us, I would have to come back. Not now, but someday. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the forest one last time. It didn't just feel like scenery. It felt alive, watching, waiting. I wasn't finished with this place. One day, I would return, prepared to face whatever lingered in those woods. I'm a 30-year-old woman named Sam, living in a coastal town in Northern California. I share a 2-bedroom apartment with my roommate and her overly curious cat. Our town is framed by the ocean on one side and rolling hills on the other, with a few dry riverbeds scattered around. Our apartment sits in the middle of town, tucked just behind an old roadside inn. Local gossip claims the inn was once frequented by a serial killer in the 1980s, who allegedly stored dismembered remains in bathtubs. Between our apartment complex and the inn lies an abandoned, padlocked lot we jokingly call the creepy yard. Overgrown bushes and a couple of scraggly trees make it a prime hiding spot for stray animals and, occasionally, drifters. A narrow footpath winds from the yard, passing directly beneath our bathroom window, which sits about 7 feet off the ground. It's too high for anyone to peer into easily, yet I always feel an unsettling chill when walking near that yard. especially at night. I'm not much for cannabis, but one evening, sore from a long hiking trip, I accepted an edible from my roommate. That night, I had a vivid nightmare about being hunted by some shape-shifting creature. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing, and convinced it was just the THC playing tricks on me. I didn't dream about it again. A few weeks later, while my roommate was out of town, her cat decided to sleep in my room. Around 4 a.m., we were both jolted awake by a sharp beeping sound, like a smoke detector going off. Groggy and overheated, I stumbled out of bed, expecting to see smoke or fire. But as I scanned the living room and peeked out the window, I saw nothing unusual, except for a stark white cat statue staring motionlessly into the creepy yard. Something about it froze me in place. I watched it for a long moment, neither of us moving. My roommate's cat rolled over at my feet, demanding belly rubs. I glanced down briefly, and when I looked back up, the white cat was gone. After confirming there was no fire, I crawled back into bed. Oddly, despite having been overheated earlier, I couldn't seem to warm up for the rest of the night. The next day, I felt off. I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling, though nothing else strange happened. I did notice, however, that part of the fence bordering the lot had been bent downward, just enough for a small animal or very slender person to slip through. About a month later, around 8:30 p.m., I let my roommate know I was going to shower. I left the bathroom door unlocked in case the cat needed his litter box. As I rinsed shampoo from my hair, I heard a knock that sounded like it came from the bathroom door. "What's up?" I called, pulling back the shower curtain. "It's me," replied a voice that sounded like my roommate, but slightly off. We often joke around with silly voices, so I didn't think much of it. Expecting to see the cat pawing at the door, I opened it, but there was nothing there. I stood frozen in the steam-filled bathroom, my heart pounding. After a long moment, I closed the door and finished my shower, trying to shake off the unease. Later, I asked my roommate if she'd knocked. She hadn't moved from the couch since I'd gone in. That realization hit me hard. The knock might have come from the bathroom window, not the door. The final incident happened a couple of weeks ago. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard someone shouting faintly from somewhere outside my window. "Help me! Somebody, please help me!" The voice didn't sound quite right. It repeated over and over, growing louder until it seemed just around the corner. I looked out the window and saw nothing, but the voice persisted. A few neighbors stepped outside, equally confused. I called emergency services to report someone in distress. Eventually, the neighbors went back inside, but I stayed by my window watching. After a while, I spotted something moving under a distant street lamp. I couldn't make out any features, but the figure's movements were odd, almost jerky. It was too far to discern if they were injured or just wrong. Deciding I'd done my part, I shut off my light and tried to sleep, ears still straining for any unusual sound. Since then, everything has been quiet, but the memories of those 3 nights linger, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I keep telling myself there's no such thing as shapeshifters or creatures lurking in the shadows of this sleepy coastal town. But a tiny part of me can't shake the feeling that something isn't quite right here. Never paid much attention to those old sayings about things hiding in plain sight until the night I started my new job at the town museum. The ad in the local circular was brief, almost abrupt. Night security guard wanted. It had a phone number and nothing more. For a town barely bigger than a dot on the map, a museum always seemed out of place, like some odd relic in an otherwise forgettable spot. I had driven past it countless times without a second thought. The building was grand and stately, out of sync with the humble feel of the town, and as I would soon discover, it held secrets as shadowy as its unlit halls. The voice on the phone had an unsettling cheeriness, far too enthusiastic for a security job. "Come by tonight for your interview," the man said, his tone carrying a strange excitement. I should have recognized it as a red flag, but with bills stacking up and no better options, I didn't dwell on it. Walking up to the museum that evening felt like stepping into a scene from a movie, though the genre was still unclear: thriller, horror, or something else entirely. The wide stone steps led up to enormous double doors framed by stone gargoyles that glared silently at me. The air was still, except for the faint sound of wind threading through the columns. The door swung open noiselessly, though the silence felt somehow louder than any creak could have been. Inside, the museum's beauty was staggering. High ceilings, elaborate murals, and a faded elegance greeted me. Yet the emptiness gave it a haunting, abandoned feeling. The curator was waiting in the grand foyer. He was a wiry man with sharp features and an air of command that felt mismatched with his frame. "You must be Mr. Carson," he said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "Yes, sir," I replied, extending my hand. He glanced at it briefly, as though handshakes were some outdated custom. "Right, follow me. I'll explain your responsibilities," he said, pivoting smoothly and striding away. His movements were unsettlingly graceful, almost inhuman. I trailed behind him, acutely aware of the lifeless eyes of the portraits lining the halls. He led me to a cramped office with a desk and a single chair. "Your job is simple," he explained, his voice clipped. "Make sure nothing gets in or out." The way he said "nothing" instead of "no one" sent a chill through me. "To prevent theft?" I asked hesitantly. He paused before answering, his head tilting slightly. "Yes, theft." With a few more vague instructions, he handed me a list of rules. The paper felt oddly heavy, and the ink seemed darker than normal. Rule 1: there are no rules. As he left me alone in the dim office, the weight of the silence pressed in. The museum felt like it was holding its breath, watching me. I unfolded the rule sheet again and scanned the lines. Odd capitalizations caught my eye, forming unsettling phrases like, "They are watching." My pulse quickened. Determined to focus, I started my rounds. The first room was a sculpture gallery, filled with statues so lifelike they seemed ready to move under the flickering lights. Shadows danced along the walls, creating fleeting illusions of motion. The temperature dropped as I walked deeper into the museum. My breath fogged in the air, and I rubbed my arms for warmth. That's when I felt it, a presence. It was as if someone was standing just behind me, watching. But when I turned, there was nothing there. I entered a room I would later call the cryptid exhibit. Figures of legendary creatures, a Sasquatch, a Wendigo, and others, stood frozen in menacing poses. My flashlight beam swept across them, and I could have sworn the Wendigo's head turned slightly to follow the light. A note was taped to the exit. "The only way out is through." Taking a shaky breath, I pressed on, avoiding eye contact with the statues. My heart pounded with every step. Behind me, I heard a low growl, but I forced myself to keep moving steadily. The next room was pitch black. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, and the air was thick and oppressive. A faint hissing sound broke the silence, followed by the slithering of something large. A snake enormous by the sound of it. I froze, remembering one of the rules. "Do not move." The serpent slithered past me, its scales brushing against my leg. It felt like hours before it disappeared into the shadows. Gasping silently, I crawled toward the door, clutching my flashlight. When I reached the next room, the floor, walls, and ceiling were painted like the sky. Walking felt disorienting, as if I might fall into endless clouds. Then came the sound of wings flapping, followed by a piercing screech. A giant bird of prey dove toward me, claws outstretched. I threw myself to the ground, narrowly avoiding its talons. I scrambled to the exit, slammed the door behind me, and leaned against the cold wall, gasping for breath. The rest of the night blurred into a series of tense moments and fleeting shadows. When dawn's light finally streamed through the museum windows, it brought no warmth or comfort. The curator appeared from the shadows, his sharp smile in place. "You survived," he said casually, handing me an envelope stuffed with cash. "Would you consider staying on permanently?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. I hesitated, staring at the money in my hand. It was more than I'd make anywhere else in this town, but was it worth it? "I'll have to think about it," I croaked. He nodded knowingly. "Take care of those scratches," he said, motioning to the marks left by the bird's talons. As I stepped into the morning air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Behind me, the museum loomed, deceptively peaceful in the daylight. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a shadow move behind one of the windows. I turned away and kept walking. Some doors, once opened, demand more than we can give, and some stories aren't worth the price of telling.